Morning, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg again. The fireplace hunting seminar. And maybe the most important one this fall for you. Everybody dreams about hunting in November. The period during which almost every whitetail hunter in America is anxious to hunt during that period. And it's during the first half of November when the first of the 3 breeding periods of whitetail rut occurs. A 2-week period during which 85% of does, yearlings, and does 2.5 years of age or older are bred. Now, we've been taught to imagine that this is a really crazy time, and does are running all over the place there and eating, big bucks are trailing them all over the place, and best time of the year to take a big buck. But as you know, it doesn't work that way very often, if at all, for most of us. But it is a great time to hunt if you know how to do it. So you need to know what whitetails are up to during this particular period, and I'm actually tell you all about it. Now let's talk about that first 2 weeks first. First of all, where I hunt, breeding period begins on November 3rd. Now, further south you go in the United States, this beginning will be at a little later time because the sun is moving across, the sky is getting lower toward the south every day during that period. When we finally get to the point where there's a certain ratio of darkness to sunlight, bingo, does start experiencing estrus, heat. The beginning of breeding begins on practically the same day every year, wherever you hunt, because that certain ratio of darkness to light only occurs during this period. Actually, it's pretty stable from about, very early in November until into the first week in January. And for this reason, those that aren't bred in that first period, when 85% of them are bred, well, they'll experience estrus again 28 days later. And if they still aren't bred, then they'll experience estrus again 28 days later again. And after that, that ratio of darkness to sunlight changes, and so estrus is not triggered anymore amongst the does. So it only happens on specific days beginning in early November all across the United States, except in south central Texas, where does are in estrus a month earlier than almost anywhere else. But that's kind of unusual. But for the rest of us, this is the truth. Now, during that 2-week period, all does aren't in estrus at the same time. Only a few. In fact, in 1 square mile where you hunt, maybe none will be in estrus. None might be in estrus till the next day or the day after even. But if you took a 10, 20 square mile area, the average would be it begins on the 3rd. Yeah, in northern states, from here to New York and above that, well, here to Virginia and above that, and in southern Canada as well. What this means now, only about 10 to 12% of does are in estrus on any one day, which means there's only 1 or 2 maybe in estrus in a square mile on any one day. And there's days during the 2-week period where there's none in the square mile in estrus. So it gets spread out over this 2-week period. Now, this is important too. Each doe is only in estrus for 24 to 26 hours, virtually a day. So when a buck is with a doe that's in estrus, it'll only be with that doe for a day. So what that further means is, a buck living in this square mile, the boss buck, the big dominant breeding buck, he could be in one corner of his square mile, or they don't have corners, but one portion of his square mile, one day with a doe in heat, and the next day he could be a mile or more away on another portion of his breeding range. So there's a lot of movement made by that big buck during that period, the kind of bucks we all dream about. But it's important to know. But the thing is, it is not a circus of breeding going on out there during this period, and this is the most important period of breeding of the year. So you just can't expect to go out there and see all kinds of does being chased around by bucks during this period. There's going to be a lot less of that activity than you realize. And that big buck is going to be really tough to predict in his movements during that period. I used to hate to hunt during this period because the buck movements were so unpredictable. But you can do well. You can keep your odds really high for taking a big buck during this period if you know what to do. So now you know about this breeding period. You know, guys talk about hunting during the rut. Well, they don't think of the breeding occurring over a period of 2 months, or breeding-related activities of antlered bucks occurring over a 4-month period. I mean, there's a lot going on in this whole big period. Now, there's a lot of ways you can make that change during the hunting season. By being really aggressive and making drives. That's very aggressive hunting. Or still hunting, wandering randomly all around through a square mile or so in a day. You can chase a lot of deer out of your square mile in a single day or 2 days by hunting in that way. If you're a stand hunter and you do things right, all those deer are going to stay in that square mile, perhaps for the whole hunting season. The way my boys and I do it, we're as likely to take a big buck on the last day of the hunting season as on the first day. And you can do that too, you know. But you can keep your odds high so that you can become almost successful every year at taking an older buck, believe it or not. It took me many years to figure this out, to learn how to do this, and taking advantage of this breeding phase of the rut. So keep that in mind. Now this is, I spent 20 years on this before we finally were able to accurately describe the whitetail rut. It took all that time of studying on wild deer. But this is the truth. This is the way it works. Okay, now, where do you hunt bucks, older bucks during this season? Well, remember last time I talked to you, when we get close to at least the last week before breeding begins, which can dribble over into the first few days of November, by that time, the big dominant buck has chased all other bucks living in the square mile out of his breeding range. This square mile, he wants no competition for breeding. And those other bucks are not about to argue over that, because he's beaten the daylights out of all of them during the previous 45 days. He established himself as the most dominant, the biggest, toughest, most aggressive buck living in that square mile. And most of the other bucks are fearful of him. And so when this breeding begins, 4 or 5 bucks, some of them might be really nice size, might even be record book bucks, but they just happen to be in a range where a bigger buck lived. It can be some pretty nice bucks, these lesser bucks. The bucks lower in that square mile buck pecking order can be pretty nice bucks. But they're living off range in small areas usually, 1 or 2 acres off, maybe in a little island in a swamp or a bog, somewhere, an elder swamp, where they won't be bothered by that big buck staying out of his way during this period. They've been through this before, so they know how this works. So they don't want to have any problem with that buck. But there's some that maybe are destined to become dominant that might sneak back and think that maybe I can beat that guy this time, that big buck this time. Maybe they're thinking that. But the bucks that give the big dominant buck the most trouble during this period, and I've talked about that last time, are the yearling bucks. They haven't been through this before. As fawns, it didn't mean anything. They didn't have antlers in it. But now they got antlers, and because they do, and they're big. They're as big as an adult doe at this point. Uh, they don't know what to do about this. They're still dependent on their mothers to provide direction and leadership in times of danger. And as far as they're concerned, they're in danger when they're around that big buck. So they get chased off, they want to get back to their mothers. So they figure then they'll be safe. So they're always coming back. So during this period, you'll see big bucks, rarely, and on yearling bucks, a lot. We see a lot of yearling bucks in our hunting area during this period, and that's why. But once in a while, we also see some of these lesser bucks, 6, 8 pointers, even 10 pointers. Like a 3.5-year buck can be a 10 pointer with nice antlers. They're not as heavy, not as thick as the older bucks. The older bucks in their prime are 4.5 to 6.5, and 5.5 they're at their top. And in the wilds, their antlers start to get a little smaller, a little less bulk by the time they're 6.5-year-old. That's still pretty decent, but anyway. So you might see one of those once in a while. But if you hunt, this year, we'll be leaving camp on a little later in the month because our deer season, our firearm hunting season starts almost 6 days later. 6 days later than normal. So we'll be getting to the end of that breeding period, at which time these older bucks can become predictable again. The first thing they want to do is get some rest. They've been through a lot during the previous 2 months, all the fighting and all this business. Day and night running around through their ranges while does are in this business. Day and night when they're marking their range markers, their no trespassing signs, which are sight and scent type markers called ground scrapes and antler rubs. They're busy with all that, fighting. Well, they need rest and relaxation. So one of the first place they're going to go is to their spring, summer, fall bedding area. That doesn't change. Does change theirs a lot. They'll use a 20-acre area and bed in different spots almost every day. But the bucks keep going back to their little hideaways, which hunters don't see often unless they travel off trail once in a while. But anyway, they go back, and I used to take bucks every now and then there, but I learned after a while that didn't pay off really well, because once you spoil the safety of that big buck's bedding area, once you do that, he'll probably abandon his range. You won't see him again the rest of the hunting season. And years ago, we stopped hunting buck bedding areas. We hunt, I'm going to tell you about where we hunt all the time now. And we're looking forward to right now, today, can't wait. See, that's just a few weeks away now. Now, the very best places to hunt during this period are doe feeding areas, And those are areas, now, in our hunting area, on the 8th of November, every year, our deer start eating browse plants. There are certain browse plants. So we are a lot of wild, Mother Nature made them feeding browse areas in our hunting area. And there are old clear cuts. Most of our clear cuts now are about 8 years old or more. And some of them haven't been, some of these some of them are rather large, and Mother Nature's divided them up into places where there's lots of heavy evergreen cover and not much deer food, and over here is a great browse area, and over there is a great grazing area that they feed on a lot during the summer. But one of the ways you keep your odds really good for taking a big buck is hunting a feeding area. Now, we talked about that before. A doe feeding area, a current favorite doe feeding area. Now, that can change quickly, because you and I and everybody else is not skilled enough to avoid being discovered at a feeding area very long. You know, normally what we count on, my sons and I, is being discovered by at least the third successive feeding hours. We figure we're going to be caught by that time. He's going to know we're there. In fact, we did that for years, and we finally got to the point where we realized that some of these big bucks, not all of them, some of them are so good at finding us every day. I mean, there's bucks that go out of their way to find us wherever we are every day before they become really active in their square mile. They want to know where we are, and they do it really well and keep track of us and our movements and the trails we're using, the stand sites we use. Some of them don't bother. Some of them just become nocturnal right away. And thank goodness they don't all do that. And some of them don't do any of those things, either of those things, and they're the bucks we usually take. But there are bucks that are really good at keeping track of your movements and places where you sit. So we kept thinking, you know, it became obvious that a lot of the time, they would find us the very first time we used a new stand site never used before. Complete surprise. But that buck was lucky enough to get downwind of us, or heard us, or smelled us, you know, or saw us moving to the stand site. One of those things. But all they have to do is get downwind of you, and they can smell you a long way off. And they can come closer and check on you. Oh, well, there he is in that tree, or he's sitting in that clump of evergreens over there on the ground. And from that point on, no way are they going to come close to that thing for a long time. Probably the rest of the hunting season. They'll stay 100 yards away, depending on the cover. The main thing, they just want to stay out of sight of them. And they'll make it a point to check on that spot daily for a while to see if you have returned to that same spot. So we change stand sites. Nowadays, we change stand sites every half day. Well, it depends. We got to use a lot of stand sites in a hunting season. And a lot of them are selected at the last minute. I mean, we come midday when we make our little walk around what we call our cruise trail. We find these fresh tracks, and they're going over to this feeding area over on this side. That's where we're going to hunt next. One of the days. Well, we may hunt there later in the day, and then we find some more tracks going to another feeding area and this big cruise trail. I've talked about that. You have to go back to those presentations to learn about that. Then that might be the one we'll go back to in the morning, or vice versa, you know, depending on wind direction, things like that. But we always hunt near very fresh tracks of big bucks. Always. The reason is, and I've talked about that before, big bucks don't just walk everywhere in their square mile they live in, and some of them have 2 square miles. They don't just go through that whole square mile inch by inch, or even 100 yards by 100 yards every day. They only use certain trails to get that in about 10% actually. When you look at a map, and we've mapped these trails that they were using many times in the past. It used to be a regular thing on our maps. They're only using about 10% of total area of their home ranges throughout this breeding period. So if you aren't in that 10%, you're not going to get a buck. Now, it's true, the buck might change. You're in a non-10% area, but tomorrow there happens to be a doe in heat way over there in that feeding area in the opposite corner, or on one side or the other. There's usually 4 or 5 doe ranges in every buck's home range. It could be, and you go over there without any sign of a buck, but it's a doe feeding area, and that doe happens to be in heat today. You're going to see the big buck, even without the sign. So one of the things you should do, one way or the other, is every day during this period, hunt feeding areas of does, current favorite feeding areas. Those are areas that are full of doe tracks and tracks of their young fawns and yearlings. They'll be all over in this place where they're feeding, and after the 8th, those are going to be browse areas, and our season starts in the 9th, so after that, they're going to be all in browse areas. And so we only have to key on browse areas this year. And before, we always had to start out with graze areas, but we don't have to worry about that. So if you have nothing else to go on, hunt feeding areas that are favored by does right now. When I say favored, mature does that are 2.5 years of age or older, are almost as good as bucks at finding hunters, hunting peripheries of feeding areas. And that's why, you can find a place like that. And gee, there's a whole bunch of deer out the first time you go, and the next day you go there, maybe there's only a couple, and the next day there's none. And you can sit there day after day after day and rarely see a deer unless it's a yearling or a fawn that's been separated from its mother. I talk about this too, that when you're hunting doe feeding areas, feeding areas that are currently being used by does. I mean, you can discover doe feeding areas before the season because all kinds of tracks are dropping by does and their young in this kind of open area. Find that's there we got a feeding area. Well, when you come to hunt there later, if they've changed the kind of food, well, maybe acorns will be in there too. I mean, we're looking forward to that, but the way it's sounding now, we might have quite a bit of snow by that time, and they won't be eating acorns. But that's another place you should be hunting if you have a lot of acorns, a bumper crop of acorns this year. And I've heard that a lot of states do have a bumper crop this year. Good year for acorns, and others don't have any. But that's something to keep in mind. But anyway, so hunt doe feeding areas. And if you do that, your odds of taking a big buck are as good as they can be most of the time. Now there's another spot you can hunt, I'll tell you about that now. So anyway, keep that in mind, but don't overdo it. You find a spot like that and then camp there the rest of the hunting season, by day 3, you're wasting your time. It doesn't matter. That doe and it's young, already know, by then they know you're there, and either they're going, if it's a big feeding, they might be way over on the other end somewhere feeding, or maybe they just come there at night, or early in the morning, quit by 9 o'clock and head back to the bedding. But anyway, they might be way on the other end, and you think, oh, they didn't find me, so I'm going to keep coming back here, and geez, then you decide, okay, I'm going to move down there now, and hunt there. Okay, so it kind of depends on wind direction stuff and things like that, because in this, wherever you hunt, you want to approach your stand site from downwind or crosswind. And if you think, oh, I got to get down there and the wind is wrong, and like you might even come in from downwind there, like say in the middle of the day, thinking, oh, we're going to be down here this evening. That doe and her young will always come to the feeding area from downwind, because they use their noses to check the area out for odors that tell them, gee, there's a wolf out here, or there's a human out here, and they'll get you every time. If you're downwind at the end of the day, you want to be crosswind in the afternoon. So you have to play the winds properly to do this. You just don't want to be smelled by that doe and its young when it comes there. But if you keep working on doe feeding areas, sooner or later, almost every year, when a doe is out there, if say in the morning it's getting light, and gee, there's a doe feeding out there, and you watch and watch. Oh, there's one with antlers following that doe around. That's exciting, and that happens. And it's more likely to happen there than anywhere else in the woods during the hunting season. Now, another really good place is a scrape trail, but only at scrapes that have been just renewed. Breeding, when breeding begins, big bucks, these big dominant bucks, they don't have much of any time to be wandering around renewing scrapes, renewing the musk odors of their scrapes. once breeding begins, they just don't have much time for that. During that period, they're spending most of their time with does in heat or searching for does in heat. They don't have time for this other stuff. They got their eyes peeled all the time for any bucks that are trying to sneak back, antlered bucks, and chase them out of there. But that might keep them busy too. But this normally, there's hardly a hunter in the United States that won't be hunting on a scrape trail during this period and putting out doe and estrus lure scents there, besides spreading trail scent all over the trail where they find tracks and droppings of bucks or deer or other deer during this period. And they're wasting their time because the buck isn't going to be coming back to renew that scrape. But once in a while, and I love those once in a whiles. Once in a while you'll come upon a scrape in the woods in November while breeding is in progress that's been just renewed. Boy, the dirt is all over the top of the snow and moss, and we'll show you some pictures. Yeah, you'll see some pictures here that go along with this. Made by bucks during this period that while breeding is going on, and you look at how far that moss and all that stuff's been, the dirt's been spread across snow. That was a mad buck. Boy, 10 feet way over here, and maybe 15 feet, to one side. Now, what that kind of scrape means during this period is this. That buck is with a doe in heat in that vicinity. It could be 100 yards away right now when you find that scrape. That's with a doe in heat. And there was another buck hanging around. It might have been only the yearling, or it might have been a bigger buck. But that buck was showing that buck. I mean, when he did this scrape happened to be handy. It was right there. And this buck sees, here's another buck shadowing him. So he's going to demonstrate to that buck what's going to happen to him if he gets close to that doe. And he's going to go over there and renew that scrape, put more musk on it, and just make rags out of the overhanging branches, and showing how mad he is. It's kind of a demonstration. Now, I've taken a fair number of big bucks for the law, when I've found a really freshly renewed ground scrape in the woods during this period of breeding. And most of them, I say most of them, because you don't find them very often, most of them I've taken the big buck as quickly as within 15 minutes. I sat down and all of a sudden there he was, and he's rubbing scalps stamped on the overhanging branch, or he's just tearing up that ground scrape right there, 25 yards away. Holy cow, I hardly had time to get settled there, and there he is. I've had him come that soon. I've had to wait 4 hours. Sometimes it took quite a while before it showed up. And there were some times I was so excited about I was going to go back the next day, and next morning, early, there he is again. And it kind of depends on whether that doe is still in estrus the next morning. But don't count on it after that. After that, you're going to waste your time. After that amount of time has elapsed, you're going to waste your time at that ground scrape, because that's just not going to come in. That's not going to happen there again. So, but whenever I find one, I've taken big bucks often enough so that the first thing, I don't care where I'm going. I thought, oh boy, I'm going over this feeding area here this morning. Can't wait to get there, leave camp, flashlight, going there in the dark, and then up ahead, there's one of these scrapes. Dirt all over across the street. When I see that, I back off right now. See, I'm coming from downwind or crosswind. I back off right now, and I'm looking. Oh, there's a good spot. I'll sit in front of this tree here, this big popple. Whole bunch of hazels here. They're up there about this tall, and then when I sit there, just my head will be visible, really well covered here. Get my mask down, my camo mask, pull it down, and sit back and wait. And I can't wait. And pretty soon, darn it, here comes one, right? There he is. it's so, and you know, you'd think that you'd hear them coming a long way. This is a pretty angry buck. But it's almost like they arrive like a puff of smoke, no sound at all. And all of a sudden, there he is at his scrape. And I've dropped a bunch when I got pictures like right on the scrape. And so that's a dynamite spot in November, but only under those circumstances. But if you find one in November, don't waste your time anywhere else. Back up. If you're lucky enough to be one of these guys that finally decide to hunt from the ground level with a backpack stool, boy, this is perfect for you. Back up. Get in a spot where you're not easily seen behind a fallen tree or really thick cover, evergreen cover, maybe several little evergreen trees in a circle and get behind. But I've taken some while sitting behind a single little spruce tree or a single 6 feet tall or a pine tree 6 feet tall and taken big bucks under those circumstances. So keep that in mind. You know, the old feeding areas are best, and keep your odds high by hunting those during this period. Well, what about all this other stuff? Like using lure scents. You know, what should I do about that? Well, back in 1985, if you were using a lure scent, it didn't matter if you're on the ground or up in a tree. Most of us were in trees back in those days. We were all stand hunters then. And we'd make a half circle out in front of us with film canisters filled with cotton and soaked with dough and estrus lure scent, put them on the ground out in front of us. Boy, that worked. Okay, you know, I made a series, I've mentioned it before, I made a 12-hour series called Whitetails World back in 1985 and 86. And almost every buck in those pictures, and there's some really nice ones and they're big ones, were on film because they were responding to doe and estrus lure scent. Back then, it didn't matter how you used it. Boy, you're going to see bucks. It was really something. Well, it ain't that way anymore. Today, any mature buck, they're stand smart. You know, they smell hunters and trees, and used to be they did smell us, but they didn't look for us up there. They didn't somehow realize that we're up in the tree, and if they didn't see or hear us on the ground, they figured maybe they thought it was just trail scent they were smelling, and it was fine. So anyway, but today, you know, they smell you 20 feet above the ground. Doesn't matter how high you go up there. You're not going to get out of range because human scent spread through like I said before, a megaphone kind of area spreading out, and pretty soon you're touching the ground downwind. So anytime a buck smells doe and estrus lure scent today, accompanied by odors of a hunter, and you should know this by now too, you know, all these scent killers, all these, the clothes, any gizmo you can come up with nowadays that's supposed to get rid of odors or cover scents, you know, they aren't 100%, not by any means. In fact, they might even make it a little easier for deer to smell you. I advise you to use scent killers anyway, and I do. I use them. In my clothes, I'm really careful about keeping my clothes from being contaminated by cooking odors and other odors like gasoline and whatever. Or smoke. I don't smoke, but anyway, if you go in a room or you go in a little watering spot down there 6 miles away in the woods, and the place is full of red-coated hunters there, they're drinking beer and eating pizza and hamburgers and stuff. Man, are you going to get a lot of odors that aren't good. I mean, but I've learned over the years that when you have strong and unusual odors on you, well, a lot of deer are going to treat you with quite a bit of alarm. Geez, you'll be sitting there real quiet, and all of a sudden, snort, snort, snort behind you, and the deer's running away, obviously. You hear the pounding of hoofs. They react like that to strong and strange odors. So the less you smell, the less impact you're going to have the deer on. They're going to stay there where you're hunting, and your odds of seeing deer every day, including big bucks, are always going to be better when you don't smell. you aren't emitting strong and unusual odors. So keep that in mind. So you guys that produce that stuff, don't worry. That stuff is good anyway, important, especially in buck hunting. So, because you can't fool the noses of whitetails no matter. Their noses are 10,000 times more sensitive than humans, as good as a bloodhound. And they can smell you a mile away. They can smell, a buck can smell a doe in heat 2 miles away, so maybe they smell you 2 miles away, but you know, after they're 200 yards or more away, they aren't worried about you, unless it's wide open country. But in forest country, that's plenty safe as far as they're concerned, so they don't really worry about you when they smell you that far away. But anyway, so now you know the 2 best places to hunt during those 2 weeks before hunting begins. And keep this in mind too, you know. The more sounds you make, including grunt calls and doe calls and clattering antlers, unless you're really skilled at it, you're making really good sounds that sound like the real thing. The more you use those things, the more likely it is older bucks are going to identify you before you even know they're around. A lot of times, instead of just coming in now like they used to years ago, so when you're clattering antlers, now they're more likely to circle downwind, like black bears do at bait sites. They have to circle downwind, and if they smell you there, you can't fool them, and that happens all the time. You got yearling bucks coming, no matter what you do, because they don't know about the danger of such things. But like I said before, there are ways to use this properly, and I made a presentation not too long ago about how to use lure scents properly, so that your scents drifting downwind are not going to interfere with the scents you're using, the lure scents you're using. So it can work, but go back and look for that. Okay, so now you know where to hunt during that period. And I'm sorry if I ruined your plans, like you were planning to hunt this one spot. Oh, I got pictures on my trail camera, this big buck there. Or I got this nice, I worked so hard to build this beautiful little food plot. Some of them are big, you know, big ones. Did all these things, I got the stand site there, or maybe a ground level tent, you know, camouflage, or a blind. Got all this, boy, I can't wait. There's been a big buck. I got pictures of him. I'm going to get that buck this year. I just ruined that for you, didn't I? And I'm sorry for that. And it's probably too late for you to do much about it. So go ahead, but while you're sitting there this year, and the buck never shows up, think about what I just told you. So many of us, you know, we've been trained by people who manufacture lures and calls and rattling and all kinds of things about how to use these things. And I've been through all those myself. But you want to know the truth? I haven't used a lure scent or a call or rattling antlers in about 8 years. And I see lots of deer, and I take big bucks, and I see a lot of lesser bucks during the course of the hunting season. More, I've learned, there was a time when I thought, you know, I think bucks are getting me pegged just by the sound of my grunt call. Because I've seen bucks at a distance, and I've seen them raise their heads and look in my direction when I used the grunt call, and never came closer. And I was thinking, you know, what that sound just probably told that buck, there's a human over there, and I'm not going over there. So I quit those, all of them. I don't use them anymore. Now, I've got sons who still use doe and estrus lure scent, and they use it wisely. And every now and then, I got one that uses antlers too. He's taken some big bucks in the last 10 years, actually, when using antlers. So check back on that one. that presentation, I could tell you exactly how you should be doing that. But anyway, so you might want to use that if you think that's really important, go ahead. But think about what I told you today. Your best odds for taking a big buck this year during that first 2 weeks of November are at doe feeding areas. Current favorite ones. If there's no deer there, that isn't going to be a good place to, but there's got to be does feeding there today, tomorrow morning. Doe feeding areas or the occasional freshly made ground scrape. If you find one, don't back away. Don't miss hunting it. Don't go somewhere else. Then, of course, wherever you hunt, whatever you do, don't alarm your does. Keep in mind, during this stage of the rut, that's the best buck lure in the woods, that doe. Even when she's not in heat, that buck is going to check on her, maybe today or tomorrow morning, sometime in the next 24 to 40 hours, going to check on that doe, see if she's in heat yet or not. And so he's going to show up. He might be with her very briefly. And the time when he's most likely to do that is when the doe is in her feeding area. He knows she feeds there all the time. He's found her doing that weeks beforehand. And he smells her scents arising from that feeding area, and her tracks and droppings are all over that feeding, and those tracks and droppings are very young. He knows where that feeding. And that's the place where that buck is going to be most visible. It's kind of open there, so now you can see the things, you know. It's hard to see them in dense cover otherwise, and they stick to that a lot during this period and travel off trail a lot during this period. But keep your odds high by hunting there. And as far as lures and sounds, that's up to you. You feel you want to do that, go ahead. But think about what I told you here. Maybe next year, you'll try what I'm talking about. That means you're going to have to bone up on how to identify feeding areas. Which ones are used by does a lot, and bucks. So, which is important if you're a bow hunter. Early season, you want to be where bucks are feeding. But it's separate a lot of times from where does are feeding. They might be in the same place, but it can be very separate as well. And you'll see a picture. This picture you saw in my last presentation. You'll see it again right here. Look at this. There's 6 bucks feeding in this one open field right down below here, all grass, grazer. But anyway, so there you go now. It sounds simple. I know, I would ruin your plans, but maybe not. So if things aren't working well this season, you might try this. And to make it work, get a stool. Build one yourself. A lot of guys are building on their own now. I get letters all the time from them. They're anxious to use them. But get a stool and take advantage. You know, that's practically the only, unless there's a log at just the right place to sit on. You don't want to sit on stumps. They're damp and they aren't comfortable to sit on a log. 25 yards away, 20 yards if you're bowling, and you find one of those freshly made ground scrapes. Back off, sit down in dense cover, and you're all set. Camel head net over your face, gloves on your hands, no bright skin moving around to attract the attention of that buck. And you're downwind or crosswind, your odds of seeing that buck soon are very good. It isn't 100%, but nothing is 100% in deer hunting. Keep that in mind now. But it comes close. I mean, if you got enough time to hunt, it can be 100% every year. But not necessarily, you know, us Nordbergs, we don't go out and shoot a buck every time we go out in the woods, you know. Quite often it's just one of those times we shoot a buck. And sometimes it happens opening morning, and I hate it when that happens. I like to spend time hunting during the season. Sometimes it's on the last day, and that's great too. But gotta put a little time into it, and that's important in buck hunting as well. I mean, you just can't expect to get them on opening morning every year. You gotta work at it. So with that, thanks for watching, and boy, good luck this year during November. I really wish you all good luck. you know, I'm doing this because I want you all to be really good hunters and good enough to be buck hunters. Hunters who take bucks, oh, let's say 3.5 to 6.5 years in that group. Practically everyone you get in that age group you put on the wall. And there's no shortage of them. Remember that. There is not a shortage. Those bucks are not in danger from hunters like you and even me. I mean, it's not 100% in danger from me. But, well, some of them are. But anyway, there's only hunters who are not skilled and knowledgeable enough to hunt such bucks, successfully hunt them. So you got to be better at what you're doing to be regularly successful at taking bucks like that. That's why one of these days you just got to get this book, and it's the only one in the world that can teach you all the things you know to be regularly successful at taking older bucks. So with that, one last thing, please press this subscribe button down below, that red one there. It's important to me to be able to continue giving you hunting seminars like I've done here this morning. It's really important. I want to do this really bad. So keep doing that and and press that thumbs up button. No, that's just as important. This is part of the game of presenting YouTube presentations for Google. And if you don't have the numbers, you aren't going to be able to continue doing this. I want the numbers so I can keep doing this. And as you're now getting the idea, man, I can talk forever about hunting bucks and other deer. So there. That's the kind of things that you can find, what you're going to find in this book. So with that, thanks a lot, guys, for watching. And like I said a little bit ago, really good luck this year. I hope you do really well this year. It'll be a fun season for you this year. So goodbye now, and can't wait to see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.